In the heart of Rome's golden age, an emperor rose to power who would soon plunge the empire into chaos. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, but history remembers him by a darker name, Caligula, loved as a savior, feared as a god, and cursed as a madman. Caligula's reign lasted only 4 years, yet those years carved scars so deep that Rome would never forget. This is the story of the mad emperor, the man who turned divine power into sheer terror. To understand Caligula's madness, we must first return to the turbulent days of the Roman Empire under Emperor Tiberius. Rome was vast, wealthy, and powerful, but behind the marble walls of the palace, intrigue and betrayal poisoned the throne. Caligula was born in 12 AD, the beloved son of Germanicus, a celebrated Roman general adored by the legions. As a child, he often accompanied his father on military campaigns. Dressed in miniature armor and tiny soldiers' boots, the troops affectionately nicknamed him Caligula, Little Boots. But behind the nickname lay a childhood shadowed by loss. His father Germanicus was mysteriously poisoned, his mother Agrippina persecuted by Tiberius, and several of his brothers executed. Young Caligula learned early that Rome's palace was not a home, but a battlefield of survival. When Emperor Tiberius finally died in 37 AD, Caligula was proclaimed emperor. The city erupted in joy. To the people of Rome, the young emperor was a breath of fresh air after the cold, cruel years of Tiberius. Statues were raised, prayers were offered, and the Senate hailed him as a new golden hope for the empire. For a brief moment, Rome believed it had found a benevolent leader. But the light would soon turn into darkness. At first, Caligula was everything Rome had dreamed of. He released political prisoners, recalled exiles, and even granted bonuses to the soldiers who had adored his father. Public games were organized on a massive scale, filling the arenas with spectacles meant to delight the crowds. The young emperor walked among his people with an almost theatrical kindness, smiling and waving, basking in the love of the masses, for the Senate and the citizens of Rome. It was as if a curse had been lifted. After the long, suffocating rule of Tiberius, Caligula's generosity seemed like the dawn of a new golden age. Coins were struck with his image, and the empire believed it had found a leader who combined charisma with compassion. But the illusion would not last. Only months into his reign, Caligula fell gravely ill. Ancient writers describe him hovering near death, delirious and weakened. Some whispered of poison, others of a divine punishment. Though he eventually recovered, the man who rose from his sickbed was not the same. Gone was the charming, benevolent emperor. In his place stood a man twisted by suspicion and hunger for absolute power. Historians debate whether the illness damaged his mind, but one truth became clear: Rome no longer had a savior. It had unleashed a tyrant. What followed was a reign of fear, excess, and grotesque spectacle. Caligula no longer ruled as a mortal man, but as if he were a living god. He demanded worship, not respect. In temples across Rome, statues of Jupiter were ordered to have their heads removed and replaced with his own likeness. He paraded through the city dressed as gods and demigods, Apollo, Hercules, even Venus, forcing the Senate to bow to him. As if he were divine, his madness reached the Senate most cruelly. He mocked the senators, reducing Rome's highest office to a circus act. On some days, he forced them to run beside his chariot for miles. On others, he humiliated them with degrading commands, making them grovel at his feet like slaves. Once, he is said to have considered appointing his favorite horse, Incitatus, as a consul complete with a marble stable and servants attending to the animal. But Caligula's cruelty was not confined to politicians. The people of Rome, who once adored him, now lived in terror. He squandered vast sums of the treasury on extravagant games and banquets, then turned on the citizens with heavy taxes to fund his excess. When money ran short, he accused wealthy Romans of treason, seized their estates, and had them executed. His sadism was boundless. Ancient accounts describe him watching gladiatorial games, not with excitement, but with cold amusement, ordering executions at whim, sometimes even commanding that sections of the audience be thrown into the arena when beasts grew hungry. He delighted in reminding everyone that their lives and deaths were his to decide. Perhaps most chilling was his treatment of those closest to him. He toyed with the wives of senators, taking them to his bed in public spectacles of dominance. He executed family members on suspicion of betrayal, even though no evidence existed. Love, loyalty, and blood ties meant nothing to Caligula, only power, and the fear it inspired. Rome had expected a savior, but it had birthed a nightmare. The empire became a theater of madness, with the emperor its deranged star. Every day under Caligula was a gamble. One moment of favor could turn into a death sentence the next. Among Caligula's countless acts of cruelty and excess, several have echoed through history as symbols of his insanity. They reveal not just a tyrant, but a man consumed by delusion. One of his most bizarre displays was the construction of a temporary floating bridge across the Bay of Baiae to prove a prophecy wrong that he had no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding a horse across the bay. Caligula ordered ships to be lined up side by side, stretching for nearly 2 miles over the water. Covered with planks and earth, the bridge resembled a solid roadway. Dressed in Alexander the Great's breastplate, Caligula galloped his horse across it in triumph, savoring the spectacle. What had begun as superstition became an act of megalomania, a desperate performance to prove he could defy fate itself. Another infamous episode was his so-called war against Neptune, the god of the sea. Preparing a military campaign against Britain, Caligula led his legions to the northern coast of Gaul, but instead of invasion, he ordered the soldiers to attack the waves with their swords, as if fighting the sea itself. When the bizarre battle ended, he commanded the men to gather seashells, declaring them spoils of the sea, trophies of his victory over Neptune. The mighty Roman legions, conquerors of nations, reduced to picking shells on a beach. But perhaps the most telling sign of his delusions was the fate of his beloved horse, Incitatus. More than a mere pet, Incitatus was lavished with wealth. A marble stall, ivory manger, purple blankets, and guards to ensure his rest was undisturbed. Caligula even declared that the horse would be made consul, the highest political office in Rome. Whether he truly intended this or merely wished to mock the Senate, the message was the same. Rome's political class meant nothing to him. A horse, in his eyes, was as fit to govern as the men who once ruled the Republic. Each of these acts blurred the line between theater and tyranny, comedy and cruelty. To the citizens of Rome, Caligula was not merely eccentric, he was a living nightmare, wielding unlimited power without reason or restraint. By the 4th year of his reign, Rome was drowning in fear and resentment. The Senate had been reduced to humiliation, the treasury drained by Caligula's excesses, and the people taxed to misery. But the greatest hatred of all burned within the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's own protectors. The Praetorians, once honored as the guardians of Rome's rulers, had endured constant insult and abuse. Caligula treated them as pawns, forcing them into absurd performances, withholding pay, and mocking their loyalty. To be close to him was not an honor, it was a curse. The breaking point came in January of 41 AD. Caligula, as arrogant as ever, attended a series of games at the Palatine. Surrounded by senators, nobles, and soldiers, he believed himself untouchable. Yet beneath the surface, daggers waited in silence, led by Cassius Chaerea, a commander of the Praetorian Guard whom Caligula had repeatedly ridiculed as weak and effeminate. The conspirators prepared to strike. Caligula had turned Rome into a stage for his cruelty now. The curtain would fall. As the emperor left the theater, moving through a narrow passageway, the assassins closed in. In a sudden rush of steel, they struck. Blows rained down upon him, one, then another, then many more. Caligula, the self-proclaimed god, the mad emperor of Rome, collapsed in a pool of his own blood. The man who once commanded the legions to fight the sea now met his end not in glory, but in the shadows of betrayal. His wife and daughter were slain soon after, a brutal attempt to erase his line. The Senate briefly dreamed of restoring the Republic, but chaos prevailed. Within hours, the Praetorian Guard had declared Claudius, Caligula's uncle, as the next emperor. The empire endured, but the memory of Caligula would linger like a nightmare burned into history. Caligula's reign lasted less than 4 years, yet his name has outlived centuries of emperors who ruled far longer. In the annals of Rome, he is remembered not for victories or reforms, but for madness, cruelty, and the terrifying spectacle of unchecked power. Historians debate how much of his story is truth and how much is exaggeration, written by enemies eager to tarnish his name. Some accounts may have been embellished: the floating bridge, the war on the sea, even the consulship of a horse. But whether fact or myth, the legends themselves reveal how Rome viewed him, a ruler so terrifying that reality blurred with nightmare. For the Roman people, Caligula became the embodiment of tyranny, a warning of what happens when absolute power falls into the hands of a man consumed by ego and paranoia. His murder by his own guards did not end the empire's cycle of autocracy. It only reminded Rome that emperors could rise as gods but fall as mortals. Even today, nearly 2,000 years later, Caligula's name endures as a symbol of insanity. In power, he is invoked in stories of despots and tyrants across history, a dark echo reminding us that greatness can collapse into madness in the blink of an eye. Rome survived him. The empire continued to rise and fall under other emperors. But Caligula remained unforgettable, not as a leader, not as a conqueror, but as a cautionary tale carved in blood and legend. In the end, the mad emperor's true legacy was not what he built, but what he destroyed: trust in the throne, faith in the rulers, and the fragile hope of a people who once believed in him.